Ladies and gentlemen, there are two words, just two. When whispered, not to the world, but into the silence of your own being, reality begins to bend. Doors open, coincidences rush in, delays dissolve. What you once called impossible starts calling your name. But here's the mystery, these two words are sacred. They are not meant to be shared, not with friends, not with family, not even with the mirror, because the moment you speak them out loud to someone who doesn't understand the language of the unseen, you weaken their power. Doubt creeps in, logic takes over, and the seed of your manifestation is stolen. You see, creation doesn't happen through effort. It happens through identity, through assumption, through becoming the state of what you desire before it shows up. And these two words, they are the gateway, a portal to the version of you who already has the thing you're chasing. You may think you're here for information. You're not. You're here for transformation. This isn't about a technique. It's about alignment. And alignment begins with the inner declaration, quiet, bold, and unshakable. So I urge you, don't just listen to this speech. Absorb it, feel it, become it. Because by the end of this message, you will not only know the words, but you'll know why they work, how to speak them into the fabric of your life, and what to do once everything starts shifting in your favor. Stay with me. You've been taught to speak in order to inform, to explain, to describe what is. But I'm here to awaken you to something much deeper, much holier, something that the ancients knew but the modern mind has forgotten. Words are not simply vessels of expression. They are the womb of your world. They are the invisible tools with which you sculpt your reality. You believe you are speaking words, but in truth they are speaking you into existence. Every sentence you utter, every phrase you repeat, every inner monologue you accept as casual thought, these are not empty vibrations passing through air. These are blueprints sent directly into the heart of creation. You may not see the effects instantly, but make no mistake, every word spoken in belief returns to you, not as echo, but as form, as people, as opportunity, as resistance, or as release. That is why it's not what you ask for that shapes your life. It's what you declare, what you inwardly accept as real. Now, listen very carefully, because this is where it all begins to shift. When I say declare, I do not mean with fanfare or performance. I mean a quiet knowing, a still, sacred inner voice that whispers reality into place, not because it wants to, but because it already sees it as done. The great tragedy is that most people speak their circumstances instead of their creation. They say, I am broke, I am tired, nothing ever works for me, no one listens. They think they're describing life, but they're prescribing it. These are not reflections, these are commands, orders to the unseen forces that obey only one master, belief clothed in word. Let that settle in your soul for a moment. You are always using this creative force. The only question is whether you are using it consciously or letting it use you unconsciously. The language of creation is not about complexity. It is not about eloquence or beauty or vocabulary. The language of creation is identity. The moment you say I am, you are invoking the most powerful phrase in the universe. You are defining the unseen substance of your being. I am is not followed by facts. It is followed by fate. Say it with fear, and fear follows. Say it with confidence, and the world reshapes itself to match. Say it with love, and love floods in. And yet most of us say I am and follow it with lack, with limitation, with disbelief. Not because we want to, because we were taught to. We were trained to be humble in all the wrong places. We were taught that boldness in speech is arrogance. But what we call arrogance, creation calls clarity. The universe does not care how loud you speak. It only listens to how certain you are. Let me give you an example. If a man stands in front of a mirror and says, I am successful, but his heart whispers, I am not, which one do you think will shape his life? The whisper. Every time. Because it is not the volume of your voice that creates. It is the intensity of your inner consent. This is why I say it's not enough to affirm. You must assume. You must speak the word and wear it like a skin. Live in it as though it were already true. You must think from the end, not toward it. Speak not as someone who desires, but as one who has already received. This is where most fail. They say, I am wealthy, and then look at their bank account for evidence. They say, I am loved, and wait for a text to prove it. But creation doesn't work that way. It doesn't follow proof. It produces proof. Your words do not respond to the world. The world responds to your words. So now I ask you, what are you saying when no one is listening? What are you whispering to yourself when the lights are off? That is the prayer being answered. That is the frequency you are living on. Your outer world is just a printout of your inner speech. The events you call life are just the echoes of yesterday's beliefs. And now you know. Now you are awake. You will no longer say, this is just the way things are. You will say, this is the way I've imagined them to be. And you'll begin to listen, to really listen, to the words you casually mutter. You'll catch yourself in the middle of a complaint and turn it into a command. You'll rise from victim to visionary simply by shifting the way you speak. You'll say, I am able, and watch as ability meets you. You'll say, I am chosen, and circumstances will bend to highlight your favor. You'll say, I am whole, and healing will begin, not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped speaking against it. This is the divine code. It's hidden in plain sight. The sacred texts of every tradition speak it in symbols. The mystics live by it in silence. The prophets proclaimed it with fire in their bones. And yet here you are, hearing it anew, not with your ears, but with your soul. Because something within you already knows this. You felt it in the quiet moments, in the déjà vu, in the flashes of clarity that vanish before you can explain them. You've always known your words held weight. You just forgot that they were bricks in the house you're living in. So stop waiting for the world to tell you what's possible. Start telling the world what is. I am is your permission slip. I am is your access point. It is the beginning of every miracle and the root of every breakthrough. Let the world say what it wants. Let logic argue. Let doubt rise. You hold to the word. Speak it in secret. Guard it with reverence. Repeat it until your bones believe. And when your body still feels tired, say, I am renewed. When your bank account looks dry, say, I am overflowing. When no one claps for you, say, I am celebrated. Because eventually the outer must mirror the inner. It has no choice. Creation isn't optional. It's law. And your words, they are the lawmaker. Speak them wisely. Speak them deliberately. Speak them in love. Because you are not here to describe life. You are here to declare it. And yet as you begin to declare, as you dare to claim the I am, you will notice something strange, an urge to share it, to explain it, to speak it into the ears of others, so that they might see your transformation and believe in it with you. But I must tell you with all the urgency of truth, do not. What is sacred must remain hidden, not because it is fragile, but because it is formless, and form takes shape best in silence. When you plant a seed into the earth, you do not pull it up each day to check if it's growing. You trust the mystery of dark soil. You let the unseen do its perfect work. Likewise, when you speak your creative word, when you say I am and attach it to the reality you choose to live in, you must seal it inside yourself like a sacred vow. Speak it inwardly, consistently, with unwavering faith, but share it with no one. Not because others are evil or unworthy, but because they live in the logic of the seen. And you are speaking from the authority of the unseen. When you tell someone your declaration, especially one that has not yet taken visible form, they begin to reflect it through the lens of their own doubts, limitations, and fears. They look at your current results, not your inner shift, and without meaning to, they try to correct you back into their version of reality. Their words won't sound cruel. They may even sound caring. But make no mistake, every seed of doubt they plant becomes a delay in your manifestation. You do not need external approval for an inner truth. That is the trap. That is the noise. That is the delay. Because the moment you utter your desire into the ears of one who does not live by faith, you invite analysis. And analysis is the enemy of assumption. It begins to pull your declared word out of the womb of the subconscious, placing it back in the courtroom of reason. And what lives in reason must obey logic. But what lives in the unseen, what lives in spirit, is not subject to logic. It is subject to belief. Protect the early form of your vision as a mother protects a child in her womb. It doesn't need to be explained. It needs to be nourished in thought, in feeling, in stillness. It needs to be kept away from the friction of disbelief, the erosion of criticism, and the chill of intellectual doubt. You may say, but I want support. I want someone to believe with me. And I tell you now, your own belief is more than enough. It is not a group vote. Creation is not democracy, it is decree. In the early stages of manifestation, silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. When you are gestating a new reality, speak less. Not just to others, but even to yourself. Let your declaration be brief but bold, I am. Let the feeling carry more weight than the words. Let the assumption become so normal, so familiar, that you no longer feel the need to announce it. Because true power never explains itself. It simply is. When you walk in the knowing of a fulfilled desire, your need to prove it vanishes. You do not need to convince anyone of what you already are. The rose does not ask permission to bloom. It simply opens in season. Likewise, your word, kept sacred, will blossom in its appointed hour without your needing to justify it. And here's what's miraculous. When you stop announcing your dreams, they begin arriving faster. Not because the dream changed, but because your energy stopped leaking into the world of opinion. You are no longer dividing your creative power between imagining and explaining. You are letting it gather, condense, focus. And when that happens, when your word becomes your atmosphere, reality bends. Quietly, certainly, powerfully. So don't feel pressured to reveal your inner work to outer eyes. Don't advertise what's being woven in secret. Let your transformation speak through results, not announcements. Let the shift happen so deeply that when the world finally sees it, they say, when did this happen? And all you will do is smile, because you will know it happened the moment you said, in silence I am, and told no one. You see, if you've made a silent declaration about who you are, one so sacred and potent that it must remain unspoken to the world, it brings us to a brutal but essential truth. Who you believe you are will determine everything. That's not just poetic, and it's certainly not some esoteric abstraction. It's practical, it's psychological, it's foundational. Let me put it plainly, you don't get what you want, you get what you are. If you say I am, and you follow that phrase with something weak, something bitter, something that reflects your current struggle instead of your intended strength, then you're not speaking the future into existence. You're reinforcing the present prison, and you're doing it with conviction, with energy, with identity. Human beings are wired in a very particular way. You act in accordance with what you identify as. That's why these two words, I am, are so deeply embedded in your psyche. They're not casual. They're declarations of being. And when you repeat them, they begin to shape the lens through which you perceive the world, and more importantly, through which the world responds to you. This is why people sabotage their own growth, because they're trying to achieve something without becoming the type of person who naturally achieves it. It's not enough to hope for wealth while still identifying as someone who's always scraping by. It's not enough to desire love while clinging to the belief that you're unlovable. That contradiction creates a split inside of you, a psychological war, and it paralyzes you. Do you know how many people live stuck in that contradiction? Thousands, millions, maybe more. They say they want to change, but every word they speak confirms the identity of the person they were yesterday. And the body listens, the brain listens, the world listens. You can't lie to yourself and expect real change. The unconscious mind, the core of who you are, doesn't respond to lies. It responds to belief that has been rehearsed into reality. So if you want to manifest anything at all, you must first become the version of yourself who already has it. You must speak from that place, think from that place, behave as though it were already true, not in a delusional way, but in a strategic, courageous, focused way. This is where the hard work comes in, not the outer hustle, but the inner shift, the daily recalibration of your identity. You need to ask yourself, who am I being today? Do my thoughts match the future I claim I want? Are my habits aligned with the kind of person I say I am? It's tough, and it's sobering, because most people want the result without the reconstruction. They want the fruit without growing the root. But reality doesn't work like that. Your identity is like a thermostat. You might spike in behavior, try something new, set a goal, declare a dream. But if your internal identity hasn't changed, you'll snap back to where that thermostat is set. It's inevitable. That's why people who win the lottery usually lose it all. That's why people who suddenly fall in love often sabotage it, because the identity didn't match the blessing, and so the blessing gets rejected, whether consciously or not. So what do? You change the setting. You raise the standard. You stop saying, I'll become that someday, and start saying, that's who I am now. And the moment you say it, not performatively, but sincerely, deeply, it starts to become true. You act differently. You speak differently. You see differently. Let me be brutally clear about something. This shift in identity is not comfortable. It will feel like lying at first. It will feel unnatural. But that's because you've spent so many years rehearsing a limited version of yourself. Of course, truth feels foreign if you've been loyal to falsehood for a lifetime. But that's no excuse to stay small. You're not meant to simply survive your story. You're meant to rewrite it. And that starts with the two words that define your character arc before the world ever sees the ending, I am. Not I wish, not I might, not I hope, but I am. This is where personal responsibility begins, and personal power is born. What you're about to discover could rewrite your entire reality. And the strange thing is, once you start to speak those words, I am, from a place of deep conviction, once you begin to embody a new identity, instead of begging for a new outcome, something else happens, something subtle, almost invisible, but incredibly profound. The world begins to shape itself around your assumption, and your imagination becomes the soil from which your future grows. That's not metaphor, that's reality. You might think imagination is reserved for children or artists or storytellers, but that's dangerously naive. Every single person is imagining something all the time, and more often than not, it's unconscious. They're imagining rejection before it happens, failure before they even begin, conflict before the words are spoken, and because of that, their life becomes an exact mirror of the worst-case scenarios they've rehearsed 1,000 times in their own minds. The imagination is not optional. It's not a toy. It's the womb of your experience. If you imagine consistently from the place of the person you used to be, you will remain that person, regardless of what affirmations you recite, what goals you set, or what external efforts you take. And so, this becomes the critical task. You must take control of what you imagine. This is where discipline meets vision. Imagination, when used intentionally, becomes your greatest tool, not for escape, but for embodiment, for becoming. So let's look at this carefully. If you want to shift your identity, if you want your words, those powerful declarations of I am, to stick, to take root in the subconscious and bear fruit in your life, you need to do more than say them. You need to see them. You need to feel them. And not as distant possibilities, but as present realities. Your imagination must begin to operate from the place you want to be, not toward it. That's the difference. Most people imagine forward. They look at their current circumstances, they look at the mountain ahead, and then they say, someday I'll get there. But that mindset traps them in the very reality they're trying to escape. Because as long as something is imagined in the future, it is not believed in the present. And what isn't believed now has no power to manifest. So what's the alternative? You imagine backwards. You place yourself mentally in the future, in the state already fulfilled, and then you look back from there with the confidence of someone who's already arrived. You say, of course this happened. I've lived it 1,000 times in my mind. And then something inside of you shifts. The fear begins to evaporate. The doubts lose their voice. because you've made the future familiar, and what's familiar is no longer frightening. Now, this isn't fantasy, this isn't delusion, this is responsible creation. You have to remember that the subconscious mind doesn't distinguish between what's real and what's vividly imagined. If you feed it an image long enough, especially one that's emotionally charged and repeated, it begins to organize your behavior consciously and unconsciously to make that image come true. And here's the key, this only works when you're consistent. When you're disciplined enough to stop returning to the version of yourself who doubts, who hesitates, who flinches. You must learn to live in the scene you've imagined day after day, regardless of what your senses tell you. But that's the price of transformation. Because there will be resistance. You'll be tempted to check the mirror, to look at the numbers, to ask for reassurance. But the mirror can only reflect the previous state of consciousness, not the one you've just stepped into. The world is slow to catch up, but it always does. The question is, will you hold the vision long enough for it to catch you?